Hello, my name is Thomas. Welcome to British Culture Albion Never Dies. I am very, very excited to share here this interview with Raymond Benson, an author well known for his James Bond continuation books such as The Facts of Death and 0-10, both of which I reviewed on my YouTube channel. And he joins me here to talk about Bond and beyond. I really hope you enjoy this interview. Raymond Benson, thank you very, very much for joining me today.
Hey, Thomas, thanks for having me.
And I think you know I've read your books fairly recently and very, very much enjoyed them. You're a James Bond continuation writer. Can you tell me a bit about how this came about?
Well, this is a story I've told many times, but I'll say it again. It goes way back to the, early days of my childhood in the 60s. My father took me to see Goldfinger when it first came out on the big screen, and I was 9 years old. And 6 months later, the double bill of Dr. No and From Russia with Love came out. So within 6 months, at a very early age, I saw the first three movies on the big screen, with Connery. And I immediately started reading the books, because they were everywhere in the stores, the
Mm,
paperbacks. And I was, maybe a little young to start reading them, but I got the stories. I could
mm.
understand the stories. And, I grew up being a Bond fan and reread the books a couple of times, as I grow up and really delved right into that whole thing. I was riding the crest of Bond mania,
We,
Beatlemania too.
the double whammy of Britishness there.
Oh yes, absolutely. They were hand in hand.
Ah,
1965. It was
mm.
like the Beatles and Bond were the two biggest exports out of Britain.
You mentioned reading the books quite young. Which of the books had the most impact as a young fella?
Probably Doctor No. I had read it before I saw the movie. I mean, right after I'd seen Goldfinger,
Ah,
I tried reading the book Goldfinger. That was the first one I picked up, and it was so different from the movie.
mm.
Even that first chapter where I'm just going, what? And I just kind of put it aside.
Yeah,
I knew that Doctor No and From Russia with Love were the first two movies, and so I picked up Doctor No, and that was a much more accessible, easier read, I think,
yeah.
for a younger person because it was so science fictiony. you
Yes,
know,
yes.
you
Well, I
know.
think it's even more
Uh,
accessible for older readers too. Someone asked
yeah,
me
yeah,
which
yeah.
book they should read, and yeah.
And so I loved it. I just
Mm.
went, wow. And then I started reading. I didn't read them in order at first because I didn't really know what the order was. But
Yeah, yeah.
then, as time went on, of course I did. And then eventually I would read them again in order and get a lot more out of them.
Mm.
But anyway, I did grow up to be normal. And
Do any of
I
us
went to,
really?
yeah, I went to college. I became a theater person. I wanted to be in theater. I moved to New York City. I started directing plays off Broadway, way off Broadway, uh, and composing music.
Wow.
And I did that for several years. And then in the early 80s, something happened that sort of renewed my interest in Bond. I mean, I never gave it up, but
Mm.
during the 70s, I was not much into the
Yeah.
films and what, there were no books really, that um, but the first John Gardner book came out in 1981, and For Your Eyes Only, the movie, came out in 1981. And that movie kind of harked back to the sort of the earlier Bonds because there was more Fleming material in it
Mm.
that I recognized, and I went, oh, well, that's from the short story, and that's from this, and da 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 da. And I read the John Gardner book, and I just kind of got all excited again. And I reread the Fleming books, and
Ah.
and then um, some friends of mine and I were sitting around a table, and the question came up: if you had to write a book, what would you write?
Mm.
And I said, well, I'd like to have a coffee table. I'd like to write a coffee table history of James Bond, with
Oh.
analyses and critiques of all the books and all the movies, all in one volume. Now, at the time, there had been a couple of books on the movies by themselves,
Mm.
the Stephen J. Rubin book and the John Brosnan book. Um, there was the John Pearson biography of Ian Fleming, and
Yeah.
a couple of unauthorized things, but they were all out of print. There
Hmm.
was the Kingsley Amis James Bond dossier,
Yeah.
that was out of print, I wanted all that stuff into one book, and there wasn't
Mm.
anything like that. So it was basically what I wanted on my shelf, what I wanted to look at.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to write it. So I set out to do that. And I was lucky to find a publisher very early on, submitted a proposal to a publisher, and they gave me an advance to write the book. Of course, it took me 3 years.
Gosh, yeah.
Uh, and I went to England and I met, members of Ian Fleming's family and people like
Wow.
Ivor Bryce. And, I met Ernest Cuneo in the States. And I met Peter Jansen Smith, who was the chairman of, at the time, it was called Glidrose Publications. Now
Mm.
it's Ian Fleming Publications. And he was Ian Fleming's literary agent. And
Yeah.
so, he wanted to see what I was doing since I was over there talking to all these people. And he said, let me see some of your work. And then apparently he liked it. So they gave me permission to use quotes from the Fleming books and things like that. So when the book came out in 1984, we're talking about the James Bond Bedside Companion. Um, you know, it was well received, and
Mm.
we stayed in touch, Peter and I did little odd jobs for him over the years. No pun intended. Um,
Am I right that
and
the A View to a Kill video game might have been?
I did that. I was doing other Bond work. I wrote two computer games, Goldfinger and A View to a Kill, and then also the one of the role playing game adventure modules. That was You Only Live Twice
Ah,
2, Back of Beyond.
okay.
Yeah,
That must have been quite
and
something. The film you saw as a kid, Goldfinger, and then the book you read, and then you're the one creating the video game.
yeah, I know. But of course, it was more based on the movie.
Mm.
And so then in 1995, November, very early November, right before GoldenEye, the movie came out, I get a call out of the blue from Peter. And he says, Raymond, John Gardner is deciding to hang up his hat. He wants to retire from the gig. Would you like to give it a shot? Just out of the blue. I didn't ask for it, or I didn't campaign for it. I didn't,
Mm.
it was not on my radar. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
I was actually working still with a computer game company at the time,
Oh,
writing and
okay.
designing computer games. And so I said, sure, I'll give it a shot. It was big shoes to fill. Um, so I had to sort of audition. I had to come up with a plot and an outline,
Hmm.
have that approved by not only Glidrose, but the British publisher and the American publisher.
Hmm.
And I had to write the first four chapters on spec and
Okay.
same approval process. And then once that was done, I got the contract. And it was announced in spring of 1996 that I was the next guy.
Yes. Yeah.
So that's how it happened.
And how was the reception to the first book?
Well, for the most part, it was really good. In America, it was very good. In Britain, a lot of the reviews were very good, and then there were some reviews that weren't so good. I don't know. I was the first American to write
Mm.
Bond, so I think there was a little bit of reaction against that. But I still had plenty of British fans, plenty in America. So it was received well enough that I got a contract to write more books. Let's put it that
Absolutely.
way.
Yes. And
Uh,
I noticed you do have
so
the British elements in your book very, very strongly, actually.
well, I had to write British. I mean that was one of the you know directives. I said, well, I have to write like I'm a British author.
Mm.
So, and the first couple of books, it was rough. I did come over to England a lot during those days. The 7 years that I was writing Bond, I was in England 3 or 4 times a year,
Yeah.
uh, and so a lot of that is seeping in like osmosis, you know.
Okay.
But the the British editor and the Glidrose people would sort of vet the books. The first book and the second book maybe had some Americanisms creeping in, but by the third book, by High Time to Kill, I was British.
Yes. Yeah. And you focus on kind of Britishness of things in Britain, but also around the world. So Hong Kong, Cyprus,
Right,
and so on.
right. And that was one of my the modus operandi was in coming up with plots. For the most part, I would look at a world map and see what hot spots there were that Britain was concerned about.
Okay.
Uh, and so I knew that the first book, Zero Minus 10, would be published in the year of the handover of Hong Kong.
Mm.
So that was immediately one of my first ideas about what to do. And I, pitched that to Peter and he liked the idea. And then I came up with the plot.
Mm.
We actually discussed, what direction my books would go. What should I just continue on, like in the present day,
Mm.
the contemporary, or should we go back to the 50s or the 60s?
Oh, right.
And Goldeneye came out like a week or two later while I was writing the outline,
Mm.
and it was such a huge
Yeah.
success that Peter decided, we should stay in sync with the films. And in fact,
Oh, okay.
why don't you make M a woman?
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. And another directive, I was free to do whatever I wanted,
Mm.
plot wise. But one of the directives was they wanted to make the books a little more like the movies in tone and feel,
Mm.
in sensibility. They wanted to attract, younger readers, and they thought that if it kind of had that cinematic quality, with
Yeah.
a little more humor, more action. Um, I said, I wanted to keep Bond very much the literary Bond. I wanted him to still
Okay.
smoke and drink and womanize and have all his vices.
Mm.
And I said, well, yeah, we'd like that too. If you can make it work, let's do that. And
Okay.
um, that's what we did. I tried my best.
When I'm reading your books in particular, the image I have of Bond is very much the literary Bond.
Well,
Um,
good. That's
the
what I was going for. I mean, when I read the books originally, even as a kid, I did not picture Sean Connery, even though he
okay.
was the first image of Bond that I ever had. Um, I pictured something more nebulous, more shadowy, kind of like the drawing of the comic strip from the 50s, the John
Oh,
McCluskey
okay.
comic strips. That was kind of the guy that I pictured,
Mm.
something like that. And that's always been the guy that I picture in any literary Bond work, whether it's by me or by anybody. That's the guy I picture. And so when I was writing, that was the guy I pictured. But what was really gratifying was when readers would come up to me and say, "Hey, I can really hear Pierce Brosnan say those lines, or I can hear
Mm.
Sean Connery say those lines," or they would, if they could imagine their Bond in my books, then I
Okay.
succeeded.
Yeah, it's applicable. You can imagine your actor as this character.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
And I hesitate to move on, but this isn't the only British project that you've worked on. I mean, I play the flute, so I'm obviously interested in Jethro Tull.
Yeah, I was always a big Toll fan from the beginning, and um, I I decided to do that just kind of as a lark. And I I had met Ian Anderson because he was a Bond fan. We
Oh,
met in the late '90s, because of Bond, because the Jethro Tull's the first band that Ian Anderson formed was called the Blades,
oh,
based on the club from the Fleming books.
I see.
And so I picked up on that. And so I wrote to him. I said, "Hey, I'm, writing the Bond books." And I think I sent him a copy of Zero Minus 10, and he sent me back a signed copy of Aqualung. And we became friends. And he invited when the band came through Chicago, he invited me to backstage. So I got to go backstage to see Ian, for 20 years every time they
Oh,
came through town.
wow.
Yeah, so we became friends, and I asked him if I could write this book, and he graciously did a little interview. And I mean, it's a little tiny book. It's kind of a Jethro Tull 101 book for movies and stuff. But yeah, that was fun. Yeah, British progressive rock is my thing. I was
Yeah.
totally into the whole Canterbury scene. That was Soft Machine and Caravan and Robert Wyatt and people like that. All that stuff. Pink Floyd and Gentle Giant, yes, all that stuff was.
A
I
bit
was
different
I
from
was
the
at the
Beatles.
right age when all that stuff was coming out. You know, of
Ah, yeah. So you got to
course,
write
I'm a
the.
big Beatles fan. I'm a big Beatles fan too.
Oh, okay. Hmm. Well, they did finance some films, just not Bond films, right?
Oh, right, yeah.
The
Well, no,
Beatles.
I'm very much a film historian. I taught
Okay.
film history in college, and
Oh.
so yeah, I write for Cinema Retro magazine. So yeah, I
Still
have a lot
keen.
of interests.
Yes, yes. I'm also curious. You have a book, The Black Stiletto, and that's picked up a bit of traction recently as well, right?
Right. The original one came out in 2011, and then it's a five-book serial. So the five books were published between 2011 and 2014, and they're still doing pretty well.
Mm.
It's been optioned, and yeah, it's still optioned. Hollywood works very slowly, um,
Yes.
but I feel like that's my magnum opus. I really do. I think it's the best thing I ever wrote.
Okay.
It's it's about a woman in the late 50s who goes to New York City, puts on a mask and costume, and becomes a vigilante for
Mm.
social justice, kind of like a Batman, in a way. And she's active for about 5 years. Nobody knows who she is. And she disappears mysteriously. And then we cut to the present day. There's a grown man taking care of his mother in a nursing home. She has Alzheimer's.
Mm.
And he discovers that she was the Black Stiletto. And so it's a story that goes back and forth in time all the way through it. You get her story in the past and their story in the present.
Mm.
Uh, so yeah, and it has an arc. I call it a serial because it's really one big story divided into five books.
Okay. And did you enjoy writing some of the 1950s adventures?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I'm very nostalgic for the 50s and 60s, I guess,
Mm.
and the 70s as well. Um, so yeah, I mean, I wrote a ghost story recently, Hotel Destiny, and it takes place in the 80s, so
Okay.
in New York, because that's when I lived in New York City in the 80s. So I set it in the seedy Times Square area of the time.
And how much does research take over when you take on a project like that? Is there more or less if you're
Well,
doing a period piece or?
yeah, it's very important for the bonds. It was very important because I traveled to the locations that
Mm.
I was writing about. So, and in the 90s, you didn't have Google Maps where you could take a little guy and walk around the streets and see what it all looked like. You had to go, and I wanted to experience Hong Kong and
Mm.
Cyprus and all these Morocco and all these places because you have to be able to describe the senses of it, the
Mm.
smell, sights, the tastes. You had to eat the food and stay in the hotels and all that. Which
I think you know the first two books, right? So one is in Cyprus, where I lived for 7 years. One southern China, I lived there for 6 years. As I was reading it, I was actually astonished at how well observed it all was. I'm not used to that in fiction, or in fact, sometimes.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, I took great pride in trying to get things accurate, you
Mm.
know. I mean, even the triad ceremony in Hong Kong is based on a real transcript of a ceremony. So
And was that taken from a legal case? Is that?
yeah, well, I met with the Royal Hong Kong Police at the time that when I was there, that it was still British.
Mm.
Um, and I met with the triad detectives
Mm.
in Hong Kong, and they spent an afternoon with me, and they showed me, films and gave me documents, and that's how I got all that stuff.
Yeah. Were they excited to be working with a James Bond author? Did they know
Well,
that's
that's
what
the
you were working
thing.
on?
The name James Bond opens up a lot of doors. I'm sure if I'd just been some mystery writer trying to write a story in Hong Kong, they probably wouldn't have given me the time of day. Uh, Same way with the Hong Kong and Shanghai bank building.
Oh, right, yeah.
There's a big gun, chase through the building, and ends up on the roof.
Mm.
You know, I wanted to get in there and kind of see what it was like and be able to describe it. You know, if I went up to their PR people and said, "Hey, I'm the writer. I want to stage a gunfight in your building," they'd probably call the police. But you know, hey, I'm the James Bond writer.
Yeah.
Oh, come on in. You know, oh, you want to stage a fight? Oh, cool.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Gets people on side. I like it. Can
Yeah.
I ask, what was the most interesting door the name James Bond opened?
Well, Japan was quite the experience for the sixth book, The Man with the Red Tattoo.
Mhm.
Um, I mean, going down into the Seikan Tunnel, the passenger rail tunnel that connects the main island of Japan with Hokkaido, the northern island. You know, I have a scene in that where the Bond's on the train and the Kappa is the villain. You know, he stops the train and Bond chases him into the tunnels down there. I needed to get down there, and
Mm.
that's strictly off limits to anybody that's not authorized. And they took me down. I mean, I had a big entourage of people that took me down there, and um, my guide and I we needed to go to Hokkaido
Mhm.
next, and so they arranged for the train to stop and pick us up.
Oh,
And
wow.
this was a mile underwater, halfway between the two islands where the train never stops. And
Yeah.
suddenly the train stops and the doors open and these two Caucasian guys walk on. You can imagine the faces of all the Japanese
Yes.
passengers. Who are these guys? You know?
Wow.
So think, you know, and there were lots of things like that in Japan. But I mean, in every country, I was treated very, very well. In
Mm.
Spain, there was a lot of for double shot.
Mm.
I had incredible access to different things. Um,
Was there anywhere
so
it didn't quite open a door? I mean, I lived in mainland China, right? It was not so well known.
Well,
Um,
I just took sort of a tour into
mm,
southern China from Hong Kong. So I had to kind of just make notes and things kind of on the sly because I
mm.
didn't want to look like I was taking. We were in Guangzhou and we came by the military complex and also the Sun Yat-sen Memorial, which we went
Mm.
inside. Um, so
Oh,
I
you did
used
go
that.
inside. Okay, because again, it's
Yeah,
more
yeah,
open now, so I've been inside, but I was kind of
yeah. And
surprised at.
so, you know, I wanted to take notes and stuff and take some pictures and stuff, and I had to be careful.
Mm. Fair enough. Fair enough,
Yeah,
especially then.
yeah.
Yeah.
Let's see. No, most of the places were very accommodating. Cyprus was really interesting. Corsica was also
Oh,
eye.
and more recently, you've written, sorry, the Mad Murders.
Mad Murders of Marigold Way.
Yeah.
Yeah, that takes place in this area in my hometown. Actually, it takes place on my street,
Mm.
but
Oh, okay. Oh, I didn't realize that.
I, I fictionalized the town and the street, and the neighbors, of course.
Mm.
Um, as a reaction to COVID, um,
Yes, it got a huge amount of
it takes
praise for
place.
being so contemporary. Like a lot of writers have found struggle to deal with COVID, or even TV writers with mobile phones, to be honest. But you've dealt
Well,
with contemporary events.
I I mean, I have a feeling this book was the first novel about COVID,
Mm.
and we had trouble selling it at first.
Oh,
It
right.
took over a year to sell it because no publisher wanted to touch it.
Oh,
They're afraid they'd
wow.
get COVID. Uh,
That's really
yeah,
interesting.
it was, but and my agent and I thought, oh, we have something really hot here,
Mm.
and we went to every publisher in the book, and they didn't want it. They just said, "Oh, it's a really good book, but we're afraid to publish this. You know,
Oh, wow.
we don't think readers will want to read this." Well, how do they know?
Yeah.
How do they
Yeah.
know? You know. So a year later, we kind of did resubmissions, and finally we got a publisher a very small one that took it on, and it ended up winning awards. So,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
it is you know, it's kind of like a dark comedy, really. It's kind of like a Coen Brothers movie.
Mm.
Uh, it's a crime story, but it's takes place during COVID when everybody's really paranoid and making stupid decisions, and the characters are very stupid, and
Yeah.
you know, you kind of laugh at it. So it's kind of like Our Town, the Thornton Wilder. play, Our Town,
Hmm.
meets COVID.
And that's one of the key things about it that's been praised. So it's
Yeah,
interesting to hear that was the biggest risk and the biggest difficulty
yeah,
when you're first putting it forward. It's
right,
really
right.
interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can I ask, are there any projects you're currently working on that you'd like to talk about?
Uh, I am currently working on a couple of things. I really am unable to speak of them at the moment.
Fair
Uh,
enough.
I have been ghostwriting for the last 3 years for somebody, um, doing a 3 book project for this person, and it's very lucrative. So,
Hmm.
it's writers do what they can to stay afloat. Ghostwriting, tie-in work that I've done over the years, like for Tom Clancy and Metal Gear Solid and video
Mm,
games. That's all. I mean, it's all good stuff to do. And then I'm working on an original that is for an IP, an intellectual property that I can't announce yet, but
fair enough.
hopefully we will be able to soon.
Absolutely. Best of luck. And your friends, when they're sitting around, are asking you, what's your dream project? Dare I ask, what would be your dream project right now?
Wow. I've always, for the last, I don't know, 20 years, I've always wanted to write novels in the Twin Peaks universe.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
What's so
Oh,
attractive about that?
that was my favorite television show of all
Oh,
time, Twin
okay.
Peaks. And I was so excited when it came back in 2017, and I loved it too then. I mean, I'm a big David Lynch fan. I don't
Okay.
think it'll ever happen because Mark Frost, the co-creator of Twin Peaks, did a couple of novels, already. So I think he's got that. He's the writer, so
Okay.
it's already cornered. So I don't think that'll ever happen. But yeah, that was
Well,
kind of a
who knows
project.
if he
So
wants a continuation writer? So we put it out
yeah,
there in the universe, see what comes.
yeah. Who knows? Um, yeah. I mean, I've done my bond.
Hmm.
I had my 6. So that's not going to happen again. I don't even think I want it to happen again. So.
Mm.
um,
I mean, I feel remiss. I should probably have asked earlier, but your books cover both continuation and also novelization of the films.
Right. Uh-huh.
I was curious if there's how different was your process for
It was
that?
very different because the novelizations had to be done in about 6 to 8 weeks,
Oh, really?
whereas the original books had a whole year.
Mm.
Um, what would happen was around the publisher had to have the book 5 to 6 months before the movie came out because it
Hmm.
would be published simultaneously.
Yeah.
Around May, these movies came out in November of their years. So around May, I would get the script from
Mm.
Eon, and they were still filming at the time.
Yeah.
So I had to take the script and start turning it into a novel, and they would fax me new pages every day because they were
Okay.
constantly rewriting the script, and that was true for all three books, 3 movies. Uh,
Okay.
and then I had to turn it in by June, and sometime in June. Uh,
Yeah.
it was quick work and a little stressful because I was also in the middle of writing the other book. You know,
Oh,
I was,
wow. Those were
I was,
simultaneous.
yeah, I was fitting it in while writing whatever book I was writing that year, of
Yeah.
the original books.
Mm.
1999 was very busy because I was in the middle of, well, 1999, High Time to Kill was coming out in the spring, so I had to do publicity for that.
Hmm.
I was in the middle of writing the next book, Double Shot, and going on the research trip for that.
Oh, yeah.
And I had The World Is Not Enough. And I also wrote the short story Live at Five.
Oh, wow.
So that was all, in the first half of 1999.
Mm.
Yeah. And then in the second half, I had to start writing Never Dream of Dying. So,
Plenty of
uh,
spinning plates.
yes, it was. It was that guy on the Ed Sullivan show with the sticks and the.
I'm very surprised. A thing that, I noticed a lot of people notice, especially The Tomorrow Never Dies novel, there's so much added in, there's so many layers added in, like Elliot Carver's backstory and Wei Lin and so on. I think
Uh-huh.
quite a lot of people have commented on this. there's quite a lot of depth. I'm astonished how quickly that had to be done.
Well, when you get the script and you put it all in prose, you're about 30,000 words too short.
Mm,
So you have to add stuff. You have to embellish the story.
yeah.
You have so I was working with a liaison with Eon, and so you have to ask, well, I would like to give Wei Lin a backstory, and this is what I want to do. Is that okay? And they would,
Okay.
talk to the screenwriters and whoever else they needed to talk to, and then they come back
Yeah.
and they say, okay, go ahead. So
Well, it's good to
that's
know
how
you
that
were
works.
getting the daily faxes, that they were
Yeah.
communicative.
Yes, they were. Yeah. No, it was all a very good working relationship.
Mm.
Um, it all went pretty smoothly, I would say.
Oh, that's
Um,
wonderful to hear.
and working with Goodrose and Peter and those people, now Ian Fleming Publications, they were wonderful. I had pretty much total freedom to come up with whatever story I wanted. It was never, I had to turn in an outline first for them to
Mm.
green light. I never had one rejected. They would
Oh,
always have suggestions and comments, well, what about this little section here or something, blah, blah,
I work in publishing, so I sit in a lot of proposal meetings, so that really is fantastic that every single one went through.
blah.
It really is. Okay, thank you. I very much. I must come to a close with obviously the hardball question, which is, do your books make perfect gifts for friends and family at Christmas?
Absolutely. Why wouldn't they? They make perfect gifts any time of the year.
Fantastic, fantastic. Thank you very much. Yeah, and the more the better.
All right. Thanks, Thomas. I appreciate you having me on.
Thank you.
Thank you very much to Raymond Benson for joining me for that interview, and thank you for listening. You can, of course, find the Raymond Benson books at all good bookshops. I hope you enjoy them as much as I've been enjoying them.